This is Hot Mike. Hot Mike. On the networks of WDAY. Here's Dom Izzo.
Welcome back, everybody. Hour 2 on this Wednesday morning. Ready to rock and roll. Of course, don't forget, we're leading you up to Saturday. It's going to be a great day. We've got Bison game day outside. It'll be chilly, 10 a.m. on WDAY. And then we are the pregame show because the game is on WDAY. North Dakota State, South Dakota State in the FCS semifinals. The winner moves on to Frisco, Texas, and a spot of the national championship game to be played on Monday, January the 6th. That game is on ESPN for a 6 o'clock start. And new for next season, Pete Thamel from ESPN broke the story this morning, which I nearly fell over because I've been asking for this for 10 years, that the Ivy League will be part of the FCS postseason beginning next year in 2025. The automatic bid will come out of the Ivy. They have not had postseason football in 100 years. I'm not exaggerating here. Since the early part of the 20th century when those teams were great with Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, those are the kind of schools that dominated college football in the early part of the 20th century. They have not been permitted to play postseason football by the Ivy League presidents, but sources tell Thamel the genesis for the change for the Ivy League to play in the FCS playoffs came via a proposal from Ivy League student athletes. And, of course, the Ivy plays in everything. They have a winner go to the NCAA basketball tournament. We had Cole Hage here from Fargo play with Columbia in the NCAA baseball tournament. So they have done everything but football, and thankfully that is finally rectified. I'm super pumped to have our next guest on because he covers FCS football as well as anybody, and I think he's been clamoring for the Ivy to get a shot as well. Colter Nuanez joins us from Skyline Sports out in Montana. Cover, of course, the Cats, the Grizz, everything Big Sky to make his debut on our show. It's great to see you, bud. Give me your initial thought when you heard the story go down in the Ivy League.
Well, I think that the initial thought for a lot of us that have been covered FCS and voting in the polls, et cetera, is about time.
Yeah.
You know, they restructured the whole stats poll, and that was kind of frustrating because I know a lot of us lost our votes, et cetera. But as somebody that followed it, you're always weighing, okay, is this Ivy League team worthy of being in the top 25? But is there a point of voting them in the top 25? Because they're not going to be there at the end. And so that was always so weird. The thing that I think is the biggest part of this news, though, Dom, is that Harvard, Yale, Penn, these schools, they have no problem when it comes to financing things, right? And they have played their sort of own brand of FCS football for this sort of higher than thou art type of academic elevated thing, right?
Very true.
And now, though, they're going to be in the mix. Well, what does people at Yale and Harvard want? They want to be competitive in everything. So if they come into the FCS and they realize that they are nowhere close to North Dakota State or Montana State or South Dakota State, guess what's going to happen? They're going to pour money, and then all of a sudden they're going to be competitive, and you know they'll be competitive right away. The other thing is now, one thing, you know, there's always been kids from rural America like Montana, North Dakota, these little places, even Minnesota, where you're a great high-achieving academic guy. You get offered by Princeton and you get offered by NDSU, for example.
Yep.
Some kids choose NDSU because they want to play in the playoffs. They want to play for a national championship. Like Brody Grebe, for example, at Montana State. He got offered by every single Ivy League school. He chose Montana State because he wants to play for a national championship. Does he choose Montana State now when you can get a Princeton education?
Right.
And also play in the playoffs? So I think that it's going to have a huge impact on recruiting in the FCS, and I think that these schools, if they aren't competitive right away, will be competitive as soon as they possibly can.
And there are, I can tell you, there's more than a laundry list of Bison guys that they routinely have offers from Harvard, Columbia, Penn, that have chosen NDSU, I know academically wise, but also, as you mentioned, for the chance to go and play in the playoffs. And how many games have you sat through in the non-conference where this year Mercyhurst came in out to Bozeman? I mean, Maine. Give me Harvard or a home and home. If the Bison were to go to Harvard or go to Columbia, let's go. I'll do that tomorrow.
That's a great point. I never thought about the non-conference element of it, because that's the other thing is Yale, I at least imagine, won't be scared to come to Fargo,
Right?
or Harvard won't be scared to come to Missoula. I think, and that would be sweet. I mean,
Oh,
one of the most fun parts of our jobs is when you do get sort of these new, either non-conference or playoff opponents, and you get to learn about this town and this institution, and you get to talk to their opposing radio guy who's been there for 32 years,
yep.
and he's telling you all the stories of the rise of the program. So that is a good point. That would be really cool for non-conference football in the
I look
FCS.
at the team this year. Dartmouth was ranked for a while. Harvard ended up finishing 25th in the stats poll. They were 8-2. Columbia 7-3. Yale 7-3. Those are the winning teams in the Ivy this past fall. I can guarantee you, Colter, I think you would as well, they would beat teams out of the Big South, out of the bottom of the CAA. They do it anyway right now. The UAC, they probably have some wins that I would like to see it, and now finally looks like we may get that chance.
Yeah, that's another good point, because I've always stood on this soapbox, and I know people get tired of me talking about it, but I just truly think that Portland State and Idaho State are better than most of the FCS, and they just happen to be the ninth and 10th best teams
Yeah.
in the Big Sky. It's the same thing with like Indiana State and Western Illinois and schools like that in the Missouri Valley Football Conference. Like, those schools are at the bottom of the top league, but they are still better than almost everybody that's in the, and no offense to these leagues, but the Patriot
Yep.
League and the MEAC and then, the Big South and some of these leagues. So, yeah, I mean, and that's bared out so far in this playoffs too, right? And so this is another thing that this just adds quality teams. And that's the thing is, it's not some of the teams in the Big South's fault that they can't compete with North Dakota State. It's not the same level of football anymore. Sam Herder and I were talking about this on my ESPN show last week. There's 6 or 7 teams that are playing big time football.
Yeah.
Then there's another 6 or 7 teams that are playing like really good FCS football. Then there's everybody else that's playing FCS football.
Yep.
That's what FCS football is now. These schools are not playing FCS football anymore. So hopefully, and I think we can expect the Ivy Leagues are going to be playing the big boy version of FCS football.
My colleague Jeff Kolpak is working on a story this week on the regionality of the 4 teams left. They all touch each other. The states do. There's beyond a coincidence of that, Colter. What, in your mind, why have these teams separated themselves from the rest of the FCS?
I think there's several factors that play in. I think that, first of all, in rural cold states like Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, football just reigns supreme. I mean, it is king. I think people all over from all these tiny little towns like Buxton, North Dakota, or Chester, Montana, what do they love? They love watching small school football at the high school level, and then they love following the kids that go from the small schools to the big time. And the other thing is, I always think about this, we can only talk about the weather so much. So the other thing we have to talk about is the football teams, right?
Exactly right.
And so that gives us something to do. And it's also just the fact there's no pro sports. And then you add in the fact that there's great tradition, winning history. And I don't know. I know Fargo's become a pretty big town now, so there's lots of stuff to do there. But still, for my money, probably North Dakota State football is one of, if not the most fun things you can do there. Missoula has become a big town. I mean, Missoula's over 100,000 people now. It's still the most fun thing you can do in Missoula is go to a Montana Grizz football game. Bozeman, same deal. So making it a part of the show, making it a part of the culture, I think has been huge for those teams as well. And then I think you have to credit the fact that there's so many great local athletes. That helps boost the support. But also, like, there's guys right now at Montana State, for example, they could have gone somewhere bigger out of high school. They also could have gone somewhere bigger after college started, but they stayed because they dreamt their whole lives about being a Bobcat. That means something. And I know that's true at North Dakota State and South Dakota State as well. So I think that really helps boost the sort of the supremacy of these schools.
I got to throw this theory at you that Montana State this season reminds me of the Bison of 2011, because I go back to how the Bison season of 2010 ended with the non-fumble, I'll still call it, at Eastern Washington. Brent Vegan was on that staff, and that team was determined the following year they were going to win the whole thing. I think there's a lot of similarities with the 2024 Montana State team of how last year's season ended with the blocked extra point.
I think it's a really good parallel. That 2010 North Dakota State team, I had just moved back to Montana, and my first Division I look at North Dakota State was that team that came into Bozeman,
Yeah.
and that Bobcat team was good.
Yep.
They had just won in Missoula to win the Big Sky Conference Championship. Denarius McGee is like this phenom. He's
Really
a
good.
freshman quarterback
Yeah.
from Texas. And the Bison just ran it down Montana State's throats. It was a good game until it was a runaway. And I was like, wow, that team's coming. Then that Eastern team, that's the last taste the Big Sky Conference has had of anything. They went on and won the national championship. But I agree. And I think, like McCade O'Reilly, who's an inside linebacker for the Cats, he told me earlier this season, he said, hey, we as a collective group, we've learned all our lessons. Like we got our butts whipped in Frisco when we were freshmen. We lost on the icy cold tundra in Brookings when we were sophomores. We got the extra point block last year. We've learned our lessons. There's no more lessons to learn. Now all we got to do is like go finish this deal.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they seem like a team that's just on a mission. And I think that there's a great parallel there too. The fact that Brent Vegan has been in that situation before, suffering the heartbreaks, using it to sort of propel a team and a program to a new level.
How's Tommy Mellott better this year, Colter? He was fantastic last year. He's on another level this year.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that number one, this is the biggest double-edged sword of anything I've ever seen in a quarterback room at FCS football, and that is that they brought in Sean Chambers from Wyoming so that they could have two quarterbacks, and they ran a two-quarterback system, and it made them so fortunate rather than just good because one guy would go out, and then they'd have another high-quality FCS player. When it was one or the other, they were great. Honestly, they were only both healthy for about 8 games in 2 years. When it was both of them, it actually messed with both of them, and they weren't that good. But they were fortunate to have both of those guys. Well, now that there's nobody to back up Tommy, it's made him change multiple different things. First of all, he doesn't just this unbridled running style that he loves to employ. He's reined it in quite a bit. That's gone now though. They're going to empty the clip on Saturday, and they're going to get to Frisco for sure. Like he's not going to not put it on his back because there's nothing left to save himself for. But he did a good job maintaining his health all year long. He also wasn't looking over his shoulder, so he's able to get into a rhythm. And this has been my argument for a long time as a guy that's from Montana. You recruit guys from Montana and particularly quarterbacks, and you give them a shot. And who knows if they're going to become Carson Wentz or Easton Stick or an NFL guy, but they will become as good as they can be, period.
Yeah.
They will be as good as they can be. And Tommy Mellott was always scratching the surface. Everybody knew he was a great athlete. Now he's maximizing his potential, and that potential is as one of, if not the best player in FCS football right now.
That scene in 21 when South Dakota State went out there was crazy. Is it going to be wilder on Saturday when South Dakota is there?
That's a really great question. And I wrote this in my game feature last week about how I thought that the end of the Idaho game was distinctly different than any other moment in Montana State history. When they beat Austin Peay in the quarterfinals to go to the semis for the first time in 37 years, Jeff Choate did a fist pump like he won the Super Bowl, like they were taking Gatorade baths, like everybody's celebrating like 1984. And then they go to Fargo and they get their butts absolutely whipped. But okay, we made it. We're in the Final Four. Well, now, 5 years later, they've been in the Final Four every year. Now they know, and that. And then to be fair, they hadn't had another home game except for that 21 game against South Dakota State. But I do think that is the primary factor on Saturday. X's and O's aside, the line matchup aside, it's very, very rare that, and North Dakota State's gotten this more than most people, but it's very, very rare that you get these moments of true finality in sports. And Montana State is well aware that Saturday is the last game that this group of seniors is going to play at Bobcat Stadium, no matter if they win or lose. And I think that caters to having some pretty supreme performances. Like you look at Troy Anderson starting in the NFL right now. The greatest football game Troy Anderson ever played was 2021 semifinals against South Dakota State.
It's
Daniel
awesome.
Hardy, same deal. He's playing for the Chicago Bears. Greatest football game he's ever played. I mean, he had 3 sacks in the second half of that game against South Dakota State because he knew it was his last time ever performing in that arena. So I think that will play heavily on Saturday. And I expect, the last 2 playoff crowds have been the 2 biggest playoff crowds in Bobcat football history. I expect that to be the same again on Saturday.
And Viggs is cracking smiles. Like the guy's even keel all the time. He's actually smiling. I saw it on the sideline on Friday night.
Man, I give him so much credit for his evolution. When he came in, I knew he was a really good head coach. You could tell he had learned from the Craig Bull way of doing things, temperance and discipline and all these things. But each year he's evolved. And last year, make no mistake, the Cats were stacked last year. The Cats were supposed to be a Final Four or Final Two team last year. And they let it all melt away. They got all high on their horse when they almost won in Brookings, and they let it mess with them.
Yeah.
And then they had this awful performance in Idaho, and they lose in the Kibbe Dome, and then they get their butts absolutely smacked in Missoula, and it all fell apart on them. And then they have the heartbreaker against NDSU, and all of a sudden you're sitting there like, how did we just go 8-5? That was wild. Well, everything you could have criticized from the off the field stuff, they had both their coordinators got in some legal trouble, all these different factors. They fixed all of it. They fixed every single element of it. So to be able to look in the mirror, be self-aware, and address your weaknesses, fix them, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And Vegan is the guy that spearheaded all of that. The other thing is, not only is he smiling, sometimes he's getting in the mix, he's yelling at guys. Like for a couple of years, he was the CEO, right? He would just stand over on the side with his sunglasses on and his hands in his pockets, and he would dictate some stuff, but not really.
Yeah.
Now he's in the mix, he's coaching up the quarterbacks. He's, and I think he's having a heck of a lot of fun doing it too. So it's been a cool evolution to watch. And I mean, that's why he's well deserved as the National Coach of the Year.
Two last things for you, bud. Obviously, Jason Eck is now the new head coach in New Mexico. What's next for Idaho?
I think they got to get something in the books yesterday because their entire team is in the
Gone.
portal. That's a real bummer. I don't know if there's like some sort of silver lining you can find there where the new coach gets to recruit a whole new roster.
Yeah.
I think that's how you have to spin it if you are the new coach, even if it isn't a silver lining. But NAU had this happen. Brian Wright had to bring in 67 new guys, and they made the playoffs for the first time in 7 years. So, but I think Idaho's a really good job. Like, they have some momentum. They have real fans. They have, a lot of these different things. Could they ever get to the point where we're talking about these like Final Four, Final Five teams? I'm not sure, but they certainly have the opportunity to solidify themselves as the best of everybody else for sure, and perennially be in the playoffs. So they got to make a move right now. The thing that's good for Idaho is they have a lot of guys whose name makes sense there, right? Bobby Daly, who's the defensive coordinator at Montana State, he was at Idaho beforehand. I don't think he would leave because MSU's his alma mater, but he's at least a name. Matt Linehan, who played quarterback there at Idaho, was a great player. He's been assistant coach there for a couple of years. His dad, Scott Linehan, was an NFL head coach, so he's got some pedigree. Troy Purcell's the guy who's the head coach at Carroll College and NAIA school in Helena, but he was an assistant coach at Idaho once upon a time. Then probably the leading candidate is Thomas Ford. He's a former assistant there at Idaho, is now at Oregon State. I think he would be able to bring the charisma that they're going to need to replace Eck, and I think he'd be a great recruiter as well. So, I think that's all they have to do is they just got to hire somebody quick.
Do it now,
Got to keep the momentum going. But it's a good job. It's not like you're taking over somebody you're taking over somebody that's been in the Final Eight 2 years in a row. So that's a pretty good spot to be in.
From afar, what do you think happens in Fargo on Saturday?
Man, that's a really good question. South Dakota State, since they lost that game to North Dakota State, holy cow. They've ratcheted it up. They look like last year's team, on defense at least. I just can't believe how sound and physical and aggressive they are on defense. It's overwhelming. Like, to watch, it's crazy. And the fact that Jimmy Rogers is, I don't even know how to describe him. He's like so startlingly and almost scary in his focus. Like, when they did the sideline interview last week, they're up like 49-14, and he is furious. He is furious that they have given up 14 points. So that's a pretty interesting thing to observe. That said, this North Dakota State team has a lot to play for too, right? Last year's team had that sort of the rep as the one that made the dip, but now you get everybody to come back. Yep. Cam Miller's, this is his last rodeo too, and talk about the finality of it. They know this is their last time playing there, so I have no idea, man. I know the Vegas line has this thing as like a 2.5 point spread, which means it's a pick 'em because you're going to get 2.5 for being in Fargo. So I don't know how this goes. I think it's a total coin flip game.
It's a good way to call it, man. Ride the fence on that one because I'm doing the same thing on Wednesday. Thanks so much for doing this short notice. I appreciate it. Enjoy the game on Saturday. We'll talk soon, okay?
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Dom.
Colter Nuanez joining us from Skyline Sports. It's an awesome job covering Big Sky, covering Montana State and Montana, and give us the lowdown there on the Cats and USD coming up on Saturday following the Bison and the Jacks. We'll break. We come back. We'll wrap things up. We got Bison Media Zone coming up here in about 10 minutes. Got a busy Wednesday to chat about. We'll do that. We wrap things up right after this.